Hello. Today we're going to go over this Google Analytics for tracking plan template that's built with Notion. With this tracking plan template, marketing or product team members can develop a tracking plan and then hand that tracking plan over to developers, and developers can quickly implement the tracking plan with minimal development resources and still providing the actual tracking, the data and analytics tracking that marketing and product need to do their job well. So let's jump in. So first, if you're on this page, you're going to start by duplicating this to your workspace. That'll take just a second. Cool. And then you can update the name to perhaps your company name, Google Analytics for tracking plan. We've got some tips on how to use this here, right? Feel free to delete those tips if you don't need them. And of course, you can schedule a consultation at any time if you need help creating a tracking plan. Let's start with goals. So the first thing you're going to want to do is enter in some goals. Maybe you just have one goal, right? Maybe you have 2 or 3, probably not 20. I always like to put the goals up front because those help us keep in mind that, analytics is never done, it's never perfect, but we do want to get to a place where we're getting value out of our analytics as quickly as possible. So one goal might be that we want to see, this is the most common goal, we want to see the sources of traffic that lead to conversions. That's the most common goal. Another one might be we want to use GA4 to check the accuracy of other pixels implemented with Google Tag Manager. You might even have a third one that's like if you want to use GA4's BigQuery integration, you could say use GA4 as for BigQuery data warehouse data. Cool. Great. So once you've defined your goals, whatever they are, it just helps to put them up front and be clear about them. You're going to start adding things into the tracking plan. Okay, let's start with just some information that makes it easier to get around the tracking plan. So first, put in your Google Analytics property, just a link to your Google Analytics property. It's right here. All right, just link to the homepage. So that way everybody knows what property. Lots of organizations have multiple properties. With Google Analytics 4, you should only have one, but a lot of people have multiple GA4 properties as is anyway. So it helps to link to which one this tracking plan has to do with, right? Next, we're going to add some data streams. Now, again, for most organizations, the right decision is to use only one data stream for all web platforms, right? So if you have a marketing website and a app, and the app's on a different subdomain, and maybe you even have a third subdomain that you use for landing pages like Unbounce or something like that, all of those, according to GA4's documentation, should be put on the same website. So this is really, you should have a data stream per platform. The platforms are web, Android, and iOS, right? You'll see here, if I try to add a web stream, it gives me this note about the documentation. But if you have a website, a web app, and an Android and an iOS app, you would certainly want to add an iOS app as your as a data stream, and you'll also want to add an Android app as a data stream. Cool. When you add those data streams, you're going to want to add them here as well. It's just a simple matter of adding them to adding the name of the data stream. So I would update this website one to be Slide Rule Analytics website, like that. Cool. And then if I had another one, it might be iOS app, like that. Great. Okay, cool. Next, let's go back to the home page. So we're under demo, and let's continue on. So now that I've added my information, the next thing I'm going to do is add the tracking events, right? Now the tracking events here, adding these are this is the bulk of the work when defining a tracking plan, right? So this is not something you should expect to do in 2 minutes. Really, this is the thing with the tracking plan that takes the most time, right? Now we've tried to speed that up for you by creating different specs, right? So these specs, which you can see over here, are things, common use cases for uh, tracking. So we've got some recommended events for all sites. Those are telephone clicks, call to action clicks, things like that. For B2B SaaS companies, we have some recommendations. You're going to want a purchase event. You probably want some trial started and trial end events. You want to track login clicks, things like that. If you're a content heavy site like a blog, we've got a spec for that: blogs, documentation, webinar, etc. Of course, the e-commerce spec is based on the recommended events over here in Google Analytics from Google's documentation. So we've got all of these events predefined for you, right? And then we've got, for subscription services, we've got that, and we've got a video tracking spec. So you can use these. This will speed up your creation of events a lot. You don't have to reinvent the wheel on all of these things. For instance, a very common use case is going to be these e-commerce events, right? You can see we've spec'd them all out here. Cool. Now let's go to the events view and take a look at how I would use this. So the first thing I would do is I would start with all, right? Go to the all view in this Notion table, right? And I'm going to filter by spec, right? So let's say, I'm an e-commerce website. I don't need the B2B SaaS, and I don't need the content, and I don't need the subscriptions, and I don't have any videos. I could just come in here, I could select all of those, right? And then I could quickly just delete them. Delete the events I don't need. It's a good place to start, like so. Boom, right? Now, if I clear my filters, right, and I just want to look, hey, okay, show me those e-commerce specs. Good. I've got all of the e-commerce events from the predefined by Google Analytics over here. Great. So for online sales, all of these events are predefined. Good. Okay, and then I've still got my recommended events for all sites. If I'm an e-commerce website, login click might not be relevant to me, so I could delete that event. Great. Okay, cool. Now that we've deleted the specs that we don't need, let's walk through the structure of an event here. So let's take a look at this add payment info event. Or let's take a look at an add to cart event, because that's more intuitive. So first, I'm going to go back to the default view here. You'll see we've got 3 high-level properties: the progress, the status, the name of the event, whether or not it's a conversion. So if it's going to be a conversion, you're going to want to go into Google Analytics 4, and you're going to want to configure and mark those events as conversions. So if you go to configure and you've got conversions and you've got all your accounts, you're going to want to flag those as conversions, right? Okay, cool. And then we've got the data streams that they're associated with. For most websites, there's only going to be one data stream. You don't have to worry about that. For other, if you have a website and an iPhone app, then you're going to list each data stream that this one event applies to. So we're not going to create multiple events if we have different data streams. It's the same event. It should have the same parameters, the same specification. It just exists on both the iOS app and the website. Okay, now I can open this And you'll see here that I've got a lot more details. First, I've got the event parameters, right? And I can add events to that. Don't need that one. So I can add different parameters here, right? And then it shows when this event will fire, right? This is critical. This is critical to informing the developers about when different events should fire. And the critical piece here is to make sure that we're tracking as much as possible the actual thing that we're interested in. So in this case, I actually want to track when the user adds a product to their shopping cart. I don't want to track add to cart clicks, right? That's a big difference. The add to cart click is a proxy. If someone clicks the same button twice, they didn't add the item to the cart twice, potentially. It depends on your website. If they clicked it twice and they only added one item to the cart, I only want to fire this event once, right? So the critical thing here is to make sure that we're defining very clearly when we want these things to fire. It's really going to help the developers. From the developer perspective, what you're really looking for most often, the right time to fire the event is when there's a successful API response, a successful response code, 200 status code from the API response. So in this case, you have an API endpoint that lets users add items to their cart, right? When that API returns a successful response to the front end, that's when I would want to fire the add to cart event. Again, not on button clicks, not on things like that, right? Okay, cool. If you're not technical, you should spec this out as qualitatively as possible. Don't try to define for the developers what I just said about API response. Leave that up to them. That's their job. They'll do a good job on that. Next, you'll see we have tasks here. This just simply helps us track how far along we are in implementing this. When the developer actually implements this task, so when they've added the add to cart event, they can just check it off and everything will update. You see the progress will go to 100. If you have multiple data streams, again, you might want to add a new event where you can just go add and select an implementation method. If you're doing iOS, it might be Objective-C. And you would have a data stream for that. If you do that, you'll come over here and you'll see that it's added that event there. I'm going to go ahead, and then when you mark these done, the progress goes up to complete. Good. Next, we see all the parameters of this event. So you see in the case of the add to cart event, we have a value, right? We may not need that for add to cart, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it, right? So I can just delete parameters. Oops. I don't want to delete parameters here like I just did. I want to delete them here because I want to remove it from this event. I don't want to delete the parameter, right? And we'll see here soon that this will update, right? Okay, cool. There you go. All right, I've got the item ID. So that is the ID of the product, the price of the product, the product's name, and the quantity that was added to the cart, right? If I open these, I can see details about the parameters, including a description, an example, right? If there's parent parameters, the type, so lots of detail fully defined here. If I wanted to add a new property, like I wanted to add SKU, for instance, I could do the SKU of the product, just like this. I could put in an example, men's tee, usually they're like shirt, white, small, something like that, right? And this is going to be a string. Cool. And it will add it directly there. At the bottom for the predefined events, you will see sample code, right? So this sample code is for the developers, and they should be able to take this. This really speeds up the development process. They can take this sample code and they can quickly implement it without too much thought. Obviously, they will have to, figure out how to replace the example here with the actual variables, but defining it very clearly like this really helps speed up the development work, really takes what's maybe a couple of weeks to a month's worth of development work and takes it down into a day to go implement a tracking plan like this. Great, cool. Now you'll also note here that in the sample one, we have data layer pushes. There are other options. You could do sample GTag tracks. So this is if you were going to be sending from your app directly to Google Analytics 4. The data layer is if you're going to use Google Tag Manager. Okay. Now we can also define some user properties, right? User properties are still sent as parameters on the event. We just configure them differently. So in GA4, when I go and I look at custom dimensions or definitions, I've got two options to add one. I can add the scope. I can add the scope to the event or the user. If it's a parameter, it needs to be added to the scope is the event. If it's a user property, the scope is the user, right? The difference is that Google Analytics 4 will store the most recent user properties for the same user. So you can't use PII, but my name is Kevin. If you were adding that as a user property, which again, you can't because of PII, but say you did, my name would be Kevin no matter what events I do. Right? So when I'm adding to cart, purchasing, etc., I know my event. I know my name is Kevin, and you can see that in Google Analytics. The most common user property is going to be the user ID. So again, you can come up here and add predefined events here. So if we did know the user ID at the add to cart event, I could add that as a user property. And then I would want to update my data layer push to be user ID, whatever, right? Okay, cool. So that's the anatomy of an event. Hopefully it's obvious how this helps developers and you, marketing or product, get on the same page about what events should be firing, when they should be firing, how the parameters should be named, what properties should be included, and perhaps even some sample code, right? If you don't, if you're not a developer, if you're not technical, which is totally expected, we have a great way to create some sample code. So over here, if you go to adding, the adding view makes it easier to add new events. So let's go ahead and add one. Like let's add a test event that had, I don't know, a title and an email list ID, right? And let's say this is not a conversion and we want to add it to the data stream, our only data stream in this case. I could come over here and I can copy this tag manager sample code. I open the event, right? You'll see I don't have anything specced out here. I click the event template. I can describe where this event should fire. I can add a task, again, just by doing add, selecting the data stream, and if required, I can also specify an implementation method. I go back to the event. The task will show up soon. I've got my parameters that I've added here. I don't have any user properties. I can go ahead, see it added that task. I can go ahead and add a sample data layer track, and I can just paste that from earlier. You see it updates the event name, it puts as test, and it's got the properties that I listed here, title and email list ID, including their example code here. So it's that easy, right? Developers should not expect this code to be perfect. They're going to take it and implement it. It really does speed it up a lot though, adding some sample code. And you'll see here when I added this task, the status went from, if I remove this task, the status will update from to do to spec. So let's re-add that event. Take a look. You'll see it updates to do and gives you the progress of 0. Cool. That's how I add an event. Very simple. The best way, so a couple more things about this. Once you define all of your events, right, you will have the complete list of everything that you need to hand over to the developers. As the developers go through, they can, as they're going through and implementing these events, the best way for them to do that is to come here, go to the Events tab, or look at it in the homepage, go to the default view and just go down the list, open them up and go, okay, where to subscribe? This event should fire whenever a user subscribes to an email list. Okay, got it, cool. They take it, they implement it, bam, they check off done. And then on to the next thing, this updates to done. There is a task list over here that we keep. I wouldn't recommend using this task list directly just because it can be a little confusing. All the details are here under the events that they need to know, but we do put that on the home page down here so you can see what the progress is like, right? How things are progressing on the tasks, right? So here we've got the remaining tasks. I can quickly see what still needs to be added, right? Cool. One more thing to go over is the parameters table. So we've defined this as a Notion template, so that way we can create essentially a database of different parameters and link them to different events, right? So for instance, click text belongs to many different events. Many events might use click text, or let's use a good example here. The item ID, right? You can see this belongs to basically all e-commerce events, right? But I only want to define it once in the parameters table. The reason why is I don't want inconsistency. I don't want to, it should be called item ID. That's according to the Google Analytics recommended events here, right? You can see there, it's item ID. So I want to follow these recommended events and parameter names whenever possible, right? And I also, even if I have a custom parameter name, I only want to define it once because I don't want it to be, sometimes it's item ID, sometimes it's item ID, sometimes it's, product ID. I want to define it once and use it everywhere I need it in every event that it should be added to. Very similar, in fact, the exact same for user properties. I want to define them once, right, here in the user properties table, and then use them, use the same property on every event that's relevant, right? So you see here, I've got customer ID and user ID. Might want to pick one, right? If I've got different customer IDs or different than user IDs, that's the case on Shopify, for instance, then I could leave this, that's fine. Right? But I want to be consistent. The key is consistency. Cool. And that sums up how to use this Google Analytics tracking plan, Google Analytics 4 tracking plan. It really should speed up the time that it takes to both develop your tracking plan and implement it. And then it also provides good documentation about where events are firing, what events are firing, when they're firing, what parameters are included, things like that. So that way, when you come back to your Google Analytics account later and you have questions, you don't remember, hey, what was that select item thing anyway? What did that mean, right? What did it mean when we said select item, right? Oh, okay. All right. When the visitor clicks a product to view its details. Okay, very clear. All right, I got that. I understand what that means. Very, very quickly understand what that means. Cool. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, feel free to schedule a consultation here. If you have any questions, if you want to help implementing your GA4 tracking plan. And great, we'll talk to you soon.